welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I'm glad that you guys can join me this morning for this 300 and we'll go with 60th episode. I see my guests in the background. I don't want to get to my guests because I want to get into this conversation. We're joined with the one, the only John Helmer. John, if I can bring him on, or if he comes, there we are. John Helmer. How's it going, man? How you doing this morning?
Jamal, the one and only Jamal. There's only one of you, and there's only one of me, and that makes only two of us.
True, true. John runs Dances with Bears. It is a fantastic media outlet. Definitely check him out. His articles are on point and bar none, especially dealing with issues of Russia and the surrounding areas, not to mention foreign policy in general. John, it is always a pleasure to have you, and I thank you for joining me this, morning for me, evening for you, but I thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
I guess we have to start off with, I guess there are two things in it kind of dovetail. Ukraine attacks a boat in the Caspian, and
Yes.
they initially say that they did this because they were transferring weapons, and then they come back and say, our bad, it was a mistake. We didn't mean to fire a missile 700 kilometers to hit the boat in the Caspian. That was totally a mistake. What's going on with that? Some people came to the conclusion that Ukraine or the US was trying to dissolve the line between these two wars. And I initially said Ukraine, but obviously Ukraine is not functioning on its own merits. What do you make of this? Or is this, obviously, I don't think this is a quote mistake, but what do you make of this? Is there more to this than meets the eye? At this point, they seem to have de-escalated between the two sides.
First of all, Jamal, this was no accident. It was also not the first time Ukrainian drones have attacked Russian sites in the Caspian Sea. They've attempted to hit a Russian oil production platform in the Russian zone of the Caspian Sea. In this particular case, what happened was that an Iranian-flagged vessel, the Anna, was at anchor approximately 5 kilometers or 5 nautical miles off the Russian coast near Astrakhan, where it had picked up cargo. It's within 5 nautical miles because the Iranian ambassador to Russia, Kazem Jalali, said so. And he told the Russian press a good deal about what had happened, and then said, and this is rather important, that it was a Russian matter for retaliation, for a serious response, he said. I believe that's his exact terms, not an Iranian one. He said the Russians, Iran looked to the Russian side for a serious response. Subsequently, there were 2 telephone conversations, one between Iranian Foreign Minister Arakchi and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, in which Lavrov expressed condolences for the loss of the sailor's life on board the vessel, but Lavrov did not endorse or even hint at a Russian retaliation of the kind Jalali had gone to Vedomosti, the Moscow daily newspaper, earlier that day. Arakchi then had a conversation with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Sybiha. It's not the case that Sybiha denied hitting the vessel. It's not the case that Sybiha said it was an accident. What Sybiha said was that it was Russia's fault because Russia was engaged in destruction of Ukrainian targets. Okay, so the Western press have picked up a misstatement. On the other hand, on the Ukrainian foreign minister's side, there's no doubt what President Zelensky said. He said the vessel was attacked intentionally because it was carrying military cargo. Now, let's expand that a bit. First of all, whether it was carrying military cargo as such, weapons, or was simply carrying civilian cargo, the fact is that the Anna and the Caspian Sea route between Astrakhan and Bandar Anzali, or between the Russian side and the Ukrainian side of the Caspian Sea, is American sanctions busting. It's an attempt to break the southern blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, which President Trump, the Americans, the NATO allies, and the Arab sheikdoms have attempted to enforce against Iran. So the vessel moving with whatever cargo has military and strategic significance. That's the Caspian route. It's also certain that that's the sea route by which, at the beginning of the special military operation, it's certain that Iran supplied drones, the Shahid drone, to the Russian side in the early stages of the special military operation on the Ukraine battlefield. In reverse, it's, I believe, certain that Russia supplied its modifications of the Shahid to Iran. Some of those modifications have been identified. Photographs of them have been appearing in the Western military press that are clearly Russian in origin. I can't vouch for the authenticity of the pictures, but let's say there's a rough consensus that the two sides, Iran and Russia, have been helping each other. Now, that's a treaty requirement. I've got to emphasize this. I hope the audience is not getting tired of me repeating it, but it's necessary to repeat. It's Russia's treaty duty to assist Iran when Iran is under attack. The treaty signed for strategic partnership between Iran and Russia in January 2025, a year and a half ago, signed in Moscow by President Pezeshkian and President Putin. Articles 4 and 5 explicitly require the language in English. It's very funny. You have two countries, Iran speaking Farsi, the Russian speaking Russian, and it's the English edition of the treaty, the third language, which is considered, which is in the treaty to be the applicable treaty language for interpretation of the treaty. I've never seen that before. It's very
interesting.
Odd. Yeah. But that just makes it easier for us English speakers to interpret. Article 4 and Article 5 say, shall Russia, each of the contracting parties shall assist. And I've got it somewhere on my desk here. To not bother everybody with the exact language, you can read the exact language in the link. If you go to the Dances with Bears piece and you open it up and you'll find the treaty. The word is shall. The contracting party shall assist and cooperate in providing information, military information and assistance if one party or the other is subject to aggression. Now, Russia is subject to aggression from the Ukraine, and Iran is certainly subject to aggression from Israel, the United States, and the Arab sheikdoms of the Gulf. Therefore, I interpret Articles 4 and 5 to require Russia to do exactly what the American side is accusing Russia of having done. Second, we know that Secretary of State Rubio called a meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov when they were both in Manila for an ASEAN ministerial meeting in order to deliver a warning. Now, I've written about that. For some reason or other, there's not a great pickup in among the US podcasters and in the Russian military bloggers. But basically, one can understand that Rubio told Lavrov there was only 30 minutes of their meeting. And part of it was translation between Rubio's English and Lavrov's Russian, translated very peculiarly by the man sitting on Rubio's right. That was the US ambassador to India. What the hell he was doing there is very unclear, because he was outranked on his right by Alison Hooker. Alison Hooker is the Undersecretary for Political Affairs. She ranks way above an ambassador, but the ambassador happens to be a Russian originally. Sergio Gore was originally Sergei Gorokhovsky. The family changed their name when they arrived in the United States, and Gorokhovsky was a kid. Okay, he speaks Russian. Rubio used him to translate at that meeting, but the meeting, short and sweet, was Rubio says to Lavrov, we know you're assisting the Iranians with intelligence, drone guidance information, and live guidance information, which are killing our boys. American troops, the base attack in Jordan, for example, CIA station agents, they've not been identified in the casualties, including a hit on the CIA station office in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, back in March. To which it's clear from the communique, Lavrov replied, we know that you, the United States, are providing live intelligence for drone attacks for the Ukrainians on Russian territory, killing our boys. We know that you are providing satellite information, fixed wing information over the Black Sea, drone surveillance drone and guidance to enable Ukrainian drone attacks to bypass Russian air defenses and what have you. So in that conversation, each side mirrored the other. And that put them at a particular precipice or brink, which for various reasons, neither side wants to publicize, although Rubio set it up so that two US reporters who are not supposed to ask questions. The State Department handler setting up the meeting told the reporters, don't ask questions, you're not going to get any answers. But two American reporters can be heard saying to Rubio, Mr. Secretary, are you going to ask the Russian foreign minister, why is Russia helping kill Americans? Plain as day, you can hear it. Then, not to be outdone, and a US reporter tries to catch Lavrov as he's leaving the meeting and going down the escalator on his way out of the hotel. And this lady shouts out the same thing, more or less, why are you killing our American troops in the Middle East by helping Iran? Lavrov, I'm laughing because he makes a joke of it. He looks up at her as he goes down the escalator and says, nice hairstyle. That's all he says. Okay. Now, both sides, the Iranian side and the Russian side, have downplayed the issue of intelligence information for very obvious and good reasons. And I've just spelled it out. It's a treaty obligation. Second, the US side hasn't bothered to point this out to the press, and the press, the American press, the mainstream press, and even the podcasters don't seem to have caught on to the meaning of a strategic partnership agreement between Russia and Iran. Now, that's the background in which all of a sudden a drone or two travel 800 kilometers. Now, you can imagine they don't go in a straight line, whistling a tune. They move, are guided, they are diverted around. There's a whole lot of operations to avoid Russian ground defense, whether they traverse only Russian airspace or Armenian airspace or Georgian airspace or even Azerbaijani airspace to hit this vessel. We don't know. Neither Iran nor Russia, both of which know the course, are not saying. But essentially, that was a US-guided operation. No doubt about it, in my view. Therefore, when Jalali says publicly to a Moscow newspaper, it's up to the Russians to make a serious response, and the Russians don't respond, then you have then we have the problem we've talked about here before, Jamal. We keep emphasizing it. President Putin does not want to be put in public in a position where he must do more than that. Okay, must do. He says, President Putin says, my response to the Ukrainian escalation will be mirrored, meaning symmetrical, tit for tat, or as Foreign Minister of Iran, Proxies says, eye for eye. Now, what's eye for eye? When the Ukrainians hit the north-south corridor, the important sea route that is vital to Iran's supply lines, both civilian, both food, and all sorts of material as well as arms. What's essential is the movement of the Caspian Sea. At the same time, the US is guiding and endorsing, and Trump has just met Zelensky to endorse the Ukrainian attack on all of Russia's sea approaches in and out, in the Black Sea, in the Baltic, in the near seas, in other words, the seas of Azov, to hit not only Russian oil exports, gas exports, but Russian wheat exports headed for Egypt and Africa, hit in the Sea of Azov. Russian coal exports headed for Turkey primarily, and Turkey's steel industry hit in the Black Sea. What's Russia's response been? A bit mirror, half a mirror, you might say. It's the attacks on Odessa, Chernomorsk, and the port complexes that are still used by Ukraine for access to the Black Sea. And that's basically, at the moment, now a cut-off. Russia is beginning to do to Ukraine at the Odessa ports a cut-off of incoming and outgoing supply, which the US is doing to Iran at the Strait of Hormuz, right? But the US, the NATO allies continue to use the land routes, and we've said this before, from the Polish hub, Rzeszów, into the Lvov region and on to Kiev, and then on to the combat fronts, the 6 directions from the Russian side of the advance westward. Now, so what does this mean? There's only partial response by Russia to cut the Ukraine off completely. There's a significant escalation on the Ukrainian US side to implement Trump signed this. The G7 statement of June in France calls for increasing the pressure on the Russian war economy. That's the language. Russia doesn't have an economy as far as G7 goes. It has a war economy, okay? And this was repeated in the NATO declaration in Ankara in the middle of July. So it's clear that the Caspian Sea incident was intentional. It was not only a Ukrainian intention, it was a US intention. Does it join the two wars? Yes, it does, but the wars have already been joined. We've already mentioned the engagement of Iran in drone supply to the Russian side, and the reverse, the improvement on the Russian side to Iran. But that's a treaty obligation, and Russia must comply. That's the background.
Well, I mean, from my point of view, if they weren't helping, they should have been helping, right? Like, it is very amazing to me that a reporter with a straight face can ask Lavrov, "Hey, why are you helping the Iranians when we've been dumping billions of Americans?"
No, but
why are you helping kill Iranians when they've been doing this to kill Russians? Like,
there was no Russian reporter to sing out the mirror image question. Yes.
Yeah, it's just very wild to me that American media behaves that way or does that. Like, it lacks any presence of reality to ask that question. They should be helping if they're not helping.
Yes, but there is a new reality.
Yeah, they're in a new reality. But at your point, it's a treaty application.
The new reality is rising US casualties. And that's now a political issue that wasn't there, let's say, 6 months ago. But of course, we're close to election time in the US. So
Yeah.
There is a combination of factors. The two factors which kill incumbent presidents at election time are domestic price inflation and body bags, casualties on the battlefield. They killed
Yes.
Lyndon Baines Johnson's re-election chances in '68, and he pulled out in March ahead of the November election of 1968. The White House election technologists understand perfectly well that, notwithstanding whatever Trump says as tweets, which are programmed by Stephen Miller and directed at various constituencies, they're a performance for electoral purposes. I'll come to something that's really quite interesting about the way in which election calculations dominate now Trump policy, both towards Zelensky and towards Netanyahu, whom he met an hour and a half after meeting Zelensky at the Oval Office. But the political calculation is there's got to be an alibi if Americans are coming back in body bags. You remember that President Trump went to the Dover Air Force Base arrival, the ceremonial arrival of 4 casualties. 4 is very small by American war casualty standards, and Trump has been tweeting that. Small, yes, compared to Korea. Small, yes, compared to nearly 59,000 men killed during the Vietnam War. But it's a rise from 0. And 4 casualties hides the number of wounded, and 4 is not the level of death, of killed in action. So what the administration is figuring is that if the war continues between the US and Iran, Trump has to do 2 things. He has to show he's tough and winning, which you see in the tweets, which you see in the way Admiral Cooper launches CENTCOM attacks, and you see in the way Trump threatens all the time. He has to do that to hold MAGA constituency. Second, he has to minimize the cost in blood and the cost in gas prices. So he's trying to do both. Let me point out, I'm just reaching for my pictures. Why did Trump minimize, keep the press out of the 2 Oval Office meetings he had with Zelensky and then with Netanyahu? Why no press conference? Why no no press pool photo op? Well, what I can see is photographs of the meeting were publicized by Zelensky's office in Kiev and Netanyahu's meeting by the Israeli press. And I'm looking at my picture. I can't show it. It looks sort of silly on a podcast. But if you look very carefully, there's an individual standing next to General Kane at the Netanyahu meeting. Okay? And at the Netanyahu meeting, there are Vice President Vance sitting down. That's a vice president gets to sit down. His ass needs to be seated on a cushion in such events. Next to him is Secretary of State Rubio, also the National Security Advisor. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, which means Israel needs to work out more financial assistance for the US Treasury. And Susan Wiles, the Chief of Staff. Behind them, standing up, are General Kane, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and an individual that I hadn't recognized. And I've now found him, and golly, I've damn well forgotten his name. Yes, I know his name. His name is Needham. I've forgotten his first name. Pardon me for that slip. Who is this guy? Why is he there? He hasn't been seen there before. Well, He's the newly appointed Deputy National Security Advisor. That sounds kind of normal, doesn't it? Standing behind Rubio, the actual National Security Advisor, except the following. Needham has no experience in foreign policy making. He's never had academic training in any area. He hasn't had military training. He hasn't come from an intelligence service. He has no background in the topics that a national security advisor handles. That's the first point. What's his background? He's a party man, a political operative. In some countries, they call them party hacks. Okay? He runs election campaigns. He carries the shirt of the political candidates so that the sweat marks don't appear on the press during press conferences. Candidates for presidency must never look as if they're sweating, right? What is this guy doing in such a meeting? Okay, you look it up. Look it up. The only time there was a national security advisor at the same time as a Secretary of State was Henry Kissinger in 73, 75 for 2 years, okay? At that time, Henry Kissinger, occupying the two roles, had a deputy. That was General Brent Scowcroft. Now, unfortunately, he's dead. He was a gentleman, a very able man. He had been a U.S. Air Force. He had combat missions in air. He also had a PhD from Columbia University. He was a highly educated, highly trained, and highly experienced military officer. He could certainly discharge the expertise required to run the National Security Office while Kissinger was gallivanting around the world as Secretary of State. What does it mean when you have a party hack, not a general, not an intelligence officer, as deputy for Rubio? I tell you what it means. It means that the National Security Council is no longer a central coordinating unit for US policy. Number one, it's not coordinating because you need somebody with brains of a military intelligence or foreign policy kind to coordinate this high-level recommendations for presidential action that come in from all your agencies. Second, what you're having is everything in trimmed down national security staff now is run on domestic political priority. You have a party hack because he understands what the party needs for the next election. He's a political operative calculating not what the implications are of doing this or that in this war or that war. And bear in mind, the United States is engaged in several wars all at once. He doesn't have a clue about that, and he doesn't need to. But for the first time in US history, you've got a guy who says, my job is to deliver to the President of the United States the political consequences attached to all this war fighting. That's very important. Second, what's happening here is Trump has entirely given up the political value of being the peacemaker. Remember him, the Nobel Peace Prize winner who'd solved 9 different wars. Well,
right.
Am I telling any of our audience, nobody in the United States, no sensible, no half-witted American who's just been committed to a lunacy hospital, nobody believes President Trump is a peacemaker? Okay, now let me reach for my polls here. The president's job approval rating is losing 1 percentage point basically a week as these wars go on. He's got a disapproval rate, let's see, of for his total job approval of approximately 58% and an approval rate of 41%. But the handling of Russia-Ukraine war is a much bigger spread. Disapproval is 56, approval's 37. His handling of Iran is even greater. 60% disapproval, 37% approval. What does this mean? It means nothing that he calls peace improves his position among voters, neither the MAGA constituency nor the Republicans, and certainly not the Democrats and other folks who are simply staying independent for a while or haven't made up their minds. They have worked out, they meaning Trump, Miller, the people who calculate what will happen on November 3rd for the benefit of Trump and his succession for 2028, they're calculating everything hinges now on domestic calculation. So the wars have become performative. Yep. You get other people that do it, or you do it, but they must pay for it. And you must sell to the US voter that this isn't going to cost money. We're going to ruin Russia, but have the Europeans pay us for the weapons needed to do it. First. Second, we're going to try and do the same to Iran. We're going to threaten big and then bang them a few times. If necessary, provoke an Iranian attack. And then get the Arab sheikdoms, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Qataris principally, to pay us for the weapons supply. There are serious problems with that. The US is running out of weapons to supply. And it's got another serious problem. Israel's a big liability, a huge financial liability, which won't pay and can't pay for itself. And Jewish voters and Jewish money and Israel supporting money is a key to a lot of the political campaign costs that the Trump Republicans need. So I'm just telling you the obvious. You know this, Jamal. But what I'm saying is the presence of a nobody nobody Needham is there to signal that Trump is preoccupied with the domestic political cost of everything. So let's look back at all the things you've asked me. The Caspian Sea strike, the war against the Russian interior. All of this is of a domestic political calculation that'll swing on November the 3rd.
Well, good luck with that. Because look, because my point, like, no, you're right. He is trying to get the Europeans to pay for the war and make the argument that we're not paying for the war. This is all on Europe. And yeah, he has even made the argument that the Arab states, the Gulf, the GCC are going to effectively pay for the damages to the bases. That's assuming that the bases remain in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Problem with all of that is that ultimately Americans themselves are paying. Meaning when we go to the gas pump, when we go to the grocery store, everything is more expensive. And people are attributing that to Trump's war, which is why, you know, the American public looks at the war so lowly, why they looked at Trump is losing, while, you know, basically our expenses are going up. 70% of Americans can't afford their bills. And that is being attributed to Trump. So even if he can make the argument that, well, we're not paying for the war. Okay, again, that's kind of hard when people are pointing out that the Pentagon is asking for more money. Like, I agree with you. He is dealing with electoral concerns here in the United States, but he is dealing with them poorly.
Well, I don't doubt. He could do a whole lot worse if President Putin were to apply the mirror strategy to hitting US economic and market vulnerabilities the way Iran is. For example, Ukrainians have just hit wildberries, which is the Amazon equivalent of the stocks, approximately over 80,000 businesses, goods and services, which are traded through the wildberries warehouse and internet system. It's particularly used by the higher educated middle class urbanites of Russia in exactly the way that Amazon conducts its business around the world, and certainly in the United States. But you've got what's the retaliation that President Putin is capable of that would mirror that? Well, there are a variety of ways of striking at Jeff Bezos in retaliation. There are a variety of ways of hitting the US stock market value that's the base for Elon Musk to run Starlink, for the assistance of the guidance systems for the Ukrainian drones to come in and kill Russians, to knock the power out of Sevastopol and Yalta in the last couple of nights. In other words, if the US is doing this to Russia as part of its war plan, which it signed in Ankara 2 weeks back, what's Russia thinking of for mirror image, some tit for tat retaliation against US vulnerabilities? The Iranians have worked out how sensitive the Hormuz Strait regime is in everyone's gas tank right now. Right. Well, if the Iranians can figure that out and are showing it, let's count the number of Russian academics, think tankers, opinion pundits, and talk show hosts, and then let's add the US podcasters who get quoted by the Russian state organs, who are brilliant at telling the world how quickly Russia is going to win this victory on the battlefield. And let's ask, how many of you have come up with any option for retaliation against the US economy, especially Musk and his share value, Bezos and his share value, and a handful of others? I mean, Peter Thiel and Palantir. I mean, we could go on. I don't need to pull out a simple options textbook. Everybody in Washington's now celebrating the Lindsey Graham Sanctions from Hell a program. But how many Russian think tank or representatives of Russian think tanks have been advising President Putin a list of sanctions that would hit US capital, the US capital markets? Could Russians do a number of things to trigger a panic in US stock trading that would immediately reflect itself in market capitalization? Well, the answer is 0, 0, 0. Nobody in Russia talked about the options of mirror strikes against US capital for those particular US oligarchs who are attacking Russia and Russian capital through the Ukraine drone program. Why not? Answer: it's pretty surprising, but the answer is the Russian oligarch base on which President Putin depends does not want to disturb the US oligarch base on which President Trump depends. They want all oligarchies to unite. There's an underlying commonality here.
Oligarchs of the world.
Somebody in the audience come back to me and tell us why the Russian side does not do what President Putin said: mirror attack. I don't know why, but I just suggested in a nice, calm way what isn't even under discussion.
It is very strange. Oligarchs of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains.
Yeah, nothing to lose but the share price. Yeah.
Right, in the market. I am curious on something else, the bone-crushing sanctions. Now, Zelensky went to D.C. Obviously, him and Netanyahu had their meetings with Trump. And in the Senate, I'm unaware how the United States can provide Ukraine with more weapons. And I don't necessarily believe that Donald Trump wants the press headline of him giving Zelensky more money. So I don't necessarily know what Zelensky got in that sense. But from the standpoint of Lindsey Graham's is looking up, very happy that the Senate passed this, quote, bone-crushing sanctions from hell bill.
Yeah.
A, do you think this is even going to pass? B, this is going to have severe consequences if it does pass, considering it's going after India, China, and pretty much anybody else who buys oil products or products in general from Russia, which is effectively not going to go over well with any of these countries, particularly China. Give me your take on that. Did Zelensky get anything out of DC in this trip?
Well, let's look at the bone-crushing sanctions bill. I mean, maybe I'm a few hours out of date, but I think the U.S. senators passed it, and Congress is now in summer recess. Okay, so the House hasn't passed. It's half passed, but the Congress is in recess, so nothing much can happen till everybody comes back, and then we're very close to election time. That's first point. So it's one of those Trumpian threats that are hanging in the air. First. Second, the significant watering down that the late and unlamented Graham agreed to get it through the Senate dropped the penalty from 500% to 100%. That's 500% was a PR stunt. You can kill trade with a country by imposing 100%. That kills trade. Second, the objective of the Graham bill was to take in discretion and initiative away from the president, to take it away in two ways. One, that it would be up to Congress to legislate the targets and legislate for enforcement. It would not leave the president in a position where he could decide, yes, I've got the power, I'm going to threaten it unless they comply with me. But he always had the discretion not to apply it. That was on the, let's call it the sanctions threat side. On the other side, the object of the bill was to remove the president's power and discretion to issue waivers, to lift sanctions for temporary or permanent reasons. From a presidential point of view, and Trump's no different, presidents never agree to having executive power limited by the Congress. Right. Even if you can control the Congress, and Trump isn't doing too bad a job, and they can probably predict they'll hang on to the Senate by a couple of votes, they'll lose the House by 10, but they can massage 10 people, bribe them. They can switch votes. 10 is not a significant Democratic majority in the House if that's the result of November 3. So, but in principle, no president gives up executive power to congressional power. And Trump, of all people, has made it very clear he doesn't give up executive power to the Supreme Court. So, where are we? The sanctions bill, as passed by the Senate, keeps all of the president's discretionary powers. In that sense, we're nowhere really different than we were before the Senate passed this bill. It makes Trump feel that he's got a bigger stick to beat the backs of the Indians, the Chinese, the Turks. He hasn't and doesn't dare beat the Chinese. He made that clear, right? He went to China and cuddled and embraced with President Xi. Okay, he's not going to use that power against China. He has been using it against Prime Minister Modi. They often off on prospects I hear from Indian sources as to how close the FTA, the new Indian trade agreement with the United States will be, and what the tariff levels will be. It's off, it's on. It's also very clear that Prime Minister Modi has told that Trump through National Security Advisor Deval, we're going to wait out. You can do what you like to us, you think, but we're going to wait out because 2028 is coming, and we will wait out your term in office. You're not going to push India around like this. I understand National Security Advisor Deval told Rubio that. in confidentiality when he was last in Washington. That's not the line of the Indian Foreign Minister, and the Indian Trade Minister has a different line. But the question of the sanctions from hell hitting India depends on lots of calculations. And the key thing is Trump retains the discretionary power. So in that sense, whether it passes or it doesn't pass, we're still in the same position. He, the president, threatens, pardon me, the others have to comply or work around the sanctions that already exist. So that's where we are.
Yeah. I guess the last question I'll ask is something that you wrote in one of your articles. You pointed out, you said Russia always learns from its mistakes, regardless of how painful those mistakes are. Which is interesting because we don't. At least I don't think we do. What would be the mistakes that Russia's learned from in the process of this war? Let's say over the last year, or you can go for whatever expansive time you want. But if there were mistakes, and obviously I think we both would agree there were, and there are.
Well,
what have we learned from those mistakes, and how have they corrected those mistakes?
I think that without having to retell the history of the war, I think that the biggest mistake that is now being, as it were, unlearned is President Putin's balancing between those who understood that Russia is facing a permanent war for its destruction, and that has been US strategy since the Bolshevik Revolution. It's 100 years war. It's taken different forms and different intensities since the Civil War, in which the US intervened with troops in Vladivostok, as the British intervened in the Northwest, the Japanese, and all of the others. But certainly since the end of World War II, the US has been committed to the destruction of the Soviet Union and then the breakup of Russia in one way or another. Now, President Putin, representing the oligarch base to which I've just referred, has not wanted to accept that he faced an imperialist threat of the kind when Putin went to school was accepted method of analysis of US policy making and war making, and accepted conclusion about US objectives. In other words, he wanted, because the oligarchy wanted, to maintain the view that in a globalized economy in which they moved their wealth around without paying tax in Russia, in that economy, the Russian national interest could be secured by some combination of red line threats and business partnerships creating profit inducements. And basically, that's still the view of the Russian oligarchy in the old generation, the 96th generation, now 30 years older, the central bank governor, Elvira Nabiullina, the finance minister, Anton Silvanov, and a bunch of other folks. Now, that structure has come under significant pressure from the actual battlefield, from the actual performance, and the demonstration effects of what the US, the British, the Europeans have actually done and continue to do. So the biggest mistake is a mistake of judgment about the intentions. And there are a handful of people. I think you've had Jim Jatras on. Jim understands this perfectly well, and I can only refer to Jim and what he's been saying. Paul Craig Roberts says it elsewhere. There's no shortage of people who understand that a strategic misjudgment has been made. where we might differ, those of us who agree, Paul, Jim, me, others, where we differ is that a strategic mistake that can be unlearned doesn't get unlearned too fast if you have a political balancing calculation on the part of the president. President Putin is a balancer. Forgive me for boring everybody by repeating it. He is not a strategic thinker. He thinks politically, balance one piece of advice, one faction, one lobby with another. Now, you cannot balance contradictions and opposites. That defies logic, and no great brain or no half-wit can do it. And President Putin is no half-wit. He's a brain with a particular style and method of thinking. And in the Russian internal politics, it's not, in his view, not a mistake to maintain consensus within an oligarch structure. Only that has brought us to this point. And this is a very dangerous point for Russia, because the US is now escalating with the intent to destroy the Russian war economy. Well, President Putin doesn't want a war economy. War economy means mobilization of manpower. That would kill United Russia's chances at the election that's coming up on September 18 to 20. So the Ukrainians, the US, everybody puts out, MI6 has a sort of propaganda department to spread rumor. You read about it every day in the Murdoch press, whether it's the Wall Street Journal or the London Times. Mobilization's coming. Okay, it isn't coming because Russia doesn't have a war economy, and we're not going to have a mobilization of manpower before the election. Whether we'll have it after or not, we don't know yet. We'll see. A war economy is not only mobilization of manpower, it's mobilization of capital, isn't it?
Right.
Mobilization of capital means oligarchs who consider capital not only under their private shareholding control, but they ship the profit still abroad. The permission of Governor Nabiullina of the central bank has allowed this continuous export of capital by the oligarchy. That's how it defended itself from the threat of political attack at home. It became an international oligarchy. Thanks to sanctions, it can't do that with the same ease that it has done in the past. It's lost access to some of its toys, boats, airplanes, and what have you, palaces, ski lodges, and row houses in Upper Manhattan. Okay, so mobilization of capital in a war economy would transform, would revolutionize the Russian economy, and nothing is more anathema to President Putin personally and to his base. So we have a balancing act between opposites when we're fighting a war, and we've also had to fight this war under one of the most corrupt defense ministers in Russian history, not since the Tsar Nikolai Tsaroy, Nicholas II, tried to fight World War I. I mean, just think about it. The general staff of the present can wave to 5 deputy defense ministers of general rank who are in prison or under house arrest for massive corruption. The Russian side has fought a war with a level of corruption that is still to be fully cleaned out. So with these levels of, let's say, structural impediment, or what jargon can I use? Mistakes get made. They're not mistakes from the point of view of those who committed them, because they profited hugely. And then, of course, we have a factional split over, I've written about this today, so folks who disbelieve or find it too miserable to listen to me can go read the evidence. There's a factional split between those upcoming new generation of oligarchs and industrialists who want a permit, who who figure they will prosper in a permanent war situation that the US enforces. And there's another faction who want peace as quick as possible. So we have, yeah, well, you're supposed to laugh at the cartoons, but they're not, it's not.
I love the cartoons, personally. But keep going. I'm sorry. I love cartoons. I think they're great.
That's about John Mearsheimer. It's the piece before that that spells out the coming transformation. Yeah, okay. Successions are what are underway in oligarch generation. See those three guys up on the top of the castle there? The king is pointing at somebody wearing white. That's a white flagger. Somebody wearing red, that's a red flagger, and somebody wearing the colors of the Romanov dynasty, the royalists. So I figured that one out for its symbolism. And there's the Russian crowd pissed off about everything, as they should be, because they're facing a self-inflicted recession. We have rising bankruptcy. I mean, the reports from the Sberbank, the nation's national bank, reporting increasingly small businesses, savers are pulling cash out of the bank. They're living off cash now. What does that mean? It means people are worried. People are concerned about the future. Russians now have to vote with a level of anxiety about their own ability to run their businesses, meet their logistic and contract commitments, and so on and so on and so on. It goes on and on. I don't mention this to give aid and comfort to the enemy. I'm simply saying that there are realities here that President Putin cannot balance.
Explain something to me, and I'm sorry to interrupt. Is it because that Putin is worried about the Soviet Union, meaning the way the Soviet Union collapsed? In his mind, the West is trying to overextend Russia, and he's taking economic policies that may be overbearing, but they're overbearing because he's overly concerned about what took place from the Soviet Union. Like, meaning, I'm trying to understand why he's behaving this way in regards to the economic sphere of the war.
Well, on the one hand, President Putin admits what all Russians admit, that the collapse of the Soviet Union and the enforcement of shock therapy by President Yeltsin, his US advisors, which included Jeffrey Sachs back then. He's not claiming credit for that anymore. That was a disaster. The decade of the 90s was a time of trouble. It substantially cut the life expectancy of men and women. Cutting life expectancy means you have a relative or a child who died because the Soviet level of health support and state support had been stripped away. And that's happened to me in my family. So I kind of know about that. And I can say, speaking both personally from family experience, from burying a family member who, well, I won't get into the story, but let me make it a general point. Russian people of my age and younger do not want another time of troubles. When the other side thinks they can destroy the Russian economy, when they think they can trigger a military putsch or a political coup, that's not going to happen. They can trigger a revolution, but that's going to happen. It's a revolution of successions in each generation of the oligarchy and of the state banks and of the state corporations. But it's going to turn out quite differently from the way the other side thinks they can control. But in this context, Russian people have supported President Putin for not bringing the country back to the level of dishonor and devastation inflicted by Yeltsin, his officials, and the oligarchs, and the United States, principally at the time. So that's a real, let's say, important restraint on all political decision making. We are not going to have another time of troubles. Time of troubles, the phrase referring to the civil war that began with the Boris Godunov revolt, the Polish invasion, and the beginning of the Romanov dynasty. Time of troubles is a terrible phrase, and Russia went through it during the Yeltsin administration. So there are restraints in public opinion, there are restraints in national memory on what will happen. But President Putin, in accepting that the collapse of the Soviet Union was catastrophic, has not been quite so clear on what the benefit was of the rise of oligarchy in 1996. And he obviously will not be clear because it's the economic base of the country on which his rule is dependent. He believes he's been able to deliver prosperity and security and stability, and his public rating, the approval, reflects public opinion that he has in fact delivered in a way no one else was able to do, a level of stability, security, and positive thinking about the future. And when you look at the opinion poll, you ask people you know or your family members, it's all the same. There's been a high level of, let's say, optimism about the future, far more among Russians than when you poll the same question of Americans or British or French or Italians or Germans. That's an achievement, but the other countries don't count in your country. What counts is what happened before, what's happening in the future, your health, your education, your children's chances, and so forth and so on. You asked, Jamal, the good question, what does President Putin think he can do to, as it were, deal with this new level of US threat without going in the direction of state planning, state mobilization, state capital control, which he's rejected. He doesn't like the word socialism. He hates state socialism. He thinks that Russian voters will not tolerate that. But more than that, he knows that the oligarchic structures will fight it. And so he tries to balance the military requirement versus the economic requirements. And we came to the same point last week, I think. When you how to balance those sorts of vital opposites and contradictions, you buy time. You try to delay having to make the tough decisions. You try to get through to the next election or the next improvement in the fractional gain in the GDP, and you try to jawbone optimism.
This is a jawbone optimism. John, always a great breakdown. And you always have my appreciation for these breakdowns. I think the audience is always illuminated with your point of view and opinion. By the way, whether they agree with you or not is besides the point. I think they appreciate the point that you make on these things. And I certainly do. So I thank you for this. John Helmer, Dances with Bears. John, you have my appreciation, man. Thank you for this. You be safe, okay?
Thank you very much. See you next time.
Have a good one. Bye-bye. Shout out to John, easily one of my favorite people to talk to. There are a group of them, and John firmly fits within that model or within that list of people. Great breakdown, as always. Dances with Bears is the publication, and it is, as I pointed out, I love the pictures associated with it, but the articles are fantastic, and all of his work tends to be on there, all of his interviews, all of his breakdowns, all of these things appear on his platform, and it's a great platform. So definitely check John out. Before we close for today, because if I'm being honest, I went a little bit longer with John. That's okay. I don't like to browbeat my guests by keeping them too long, but I appreciate him for staying with me. Let's talk about the attacks that took place last night. Interestingly enough, I have not seen anything that said that the United States attacked Iran last night. interestingly enough. It's not like the war has stopped. This is also interesting in the context of not night before last, in which there were attacks, but 3 nights before the night before last. And I'm sorry, I know that sounds weird. Let's just say in recent memory, the United States went for 3 days without attacks. When Iran attacked the base in, I believe it was in Jordan, the United States immediately turns around and makes additional attacks the very next day. We are in last night, in which case I am not seeing anything about US attacks. That did not stop Iran from hitting bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan. Meaning, did they hit Jordan last night? They hit Iraq last night. Erbil, I believe it's called, Iraq. Hitting military facilities in Bahrain and Kuwait, because it was Kuwait that effectively launched the attacks that took place the night before last. The attacks that took place in Iraq, I think I have video footage of those. But what those boiled down to was hitting proxy forces associated with the United States in the Kurdish region. So, right here, is this it? Yes, okay. So this is northern Iraq, where Iran hit last night. Okay, this sounds like chaos, but I'll play it. Now, what's interesting to me, and I think I pointed this out last time, up to this point, yeah, these were kamikaze drone strikes in the Kurdish opposition headquarters in northern Iraq. And they point out on RT, fighters can be heard desperately, quote unquote, trying to shoot down the incoming drones seconds before the massive explosions effectively hit. This is interesting on a few counts. Up until this point, well, okay, before we get to that point, also 2 oil tankers get hit. So again, as I keep putting out warnings, I don't know if they're listening to this particular channel, but they should be. Don't go through the Strait of Hormuz. If the United States has come to the light, don't go. It's not heaven. It's a fire to which you will be consumed. And many of these boats that are still trying to try their luck are getting consumed in flames as they get hit. And interestingly enough, like deer or any other kind of wild animal pack, when the first 2 get hit, the other ones turn back, which is what we're effectively seeing. Ultimately, the United States is still trying to wave boats through the Strait of Hormuz, and those boats are being hit by drones or by missiles. Last night, there were 2 oil tankers that got hit in the Strait of Hormuz. The IRGC obviously has been putting out warnings, and those warnings are not always heeded, in which case a demonstration of capability once again gets required, leaving boats burning in the strait. If the US tells you to go through, don't do it. Don't do it. Look, I think the most interesting thing about this before I close is a new reality in this warfare that I don't know if many people have effectively accepted. Under normal circumstances, what you normally get is the United States initiating attacks and going after countries, with those countries being afraid to respond. So Venezuela wouldn't necessarily fire a shot in anger. Ansar Allah did. Thankfully, they did. They responded. They defended themselves in regards to the United States trying to effectively attack their leaders. But in many situations, even Iran wouldn't necessarily initiate attacks on US bases, especially unprompted, which makes all of this very strange and very interesting. And I call it a new norm. The reality of it is the United States didn't attack Iran last night. That didn't stop Iran from attacking and hitting US bases, either in Bahrain or Kuwait. Again, I want to make that clear. This is Iran taking preemptive measures to go after the US, not waiting for a response attack, meaning the United States didn't hit Iran and then Iran responded. This is Iran being proactive. Well, this is a different model of things. That means that the United States is not necessarily entirely setting the tempo. That for all intents and purposes, even if the US stops, that doesn't necessarily mean Iran stops, meaning Donald Trump proactively or unilaterally proclaiming a ceasefire doesn't necessarily change those bases in the Middle East continuously being hit by Iran as they go about enacting their particular strategy to push the US further and further away, if not out of the Middle East entirely. What's interesting about this also is that the US has been putting out, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, that pointed out that the United States was thinking about repositioning its forces in various countries like Kuwait that are effectively continuously getting hit and found themselves completely and entirely vulnerable. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that Kuwait has given up this idea of being in line with America, holding on to America, wanting to keep America close. But it does mean that America is rethinking its position in the Middle East, considering the power that Iran has been able to show to destroy its bases and degrade its capabilities in this region. Think of all the radars, the hangars, the planes, the Reapers, think of all the hardware and equipment, the Patriot missile systems. Think of all of these things that we spent the last 50, 60 years putting in the Middle East and the levels to which these things have effectively been destroyed. The eyes and ears of the United States in the region have been systematically attacked and degraded, with the idea of allowing Iranian missiles to get that much more effective as it hits those bases, or for that matter, Iranian drones. This is a new norm. Donald Trump has entered a war that Donald Trump can't necessarily extricate himself from, even if indeed the US stops. Again, I want to point out, for the longest time, the rule had been an escalatory ladder where Iran would stop allowing the US the opportunity for an off-ramp. The US would strike, Iran would strike back. The US would strike, Iran would strike back, and they would do an eye for an eye. So if you hit a bridge, or if you hit a power plant, if you hit a desalinization plant, Iran will respond in kind by doing something very similar in regards to its attacks, level at US bases, or for that matter, infrastructure of the various countries that are hosting those US bases. This is different. This is them taking the initiative. They took it the other day, into which the US responded, and they took it last night. Last night, the US didn't make any attacks, but I suspect that the US will most likely feel like they're obliged to attack because of the attacks that are on level at their bases. Understand, this is somewhat of a trap, though. If you're indeed running out of missiles, and if indeed you have hard limits because your oil is going to infinity, if indeed the war keeps going on, then what does it mean that every time Iran attacks, you feel obliged to also attack? That feels or seems somewhat of a trap, especially considering if you indeed escalate to a particular level, that escalation could lead to disastrous consequences in regards to your ability to get energy out of the Middle East in general. Meaning it wouldn't necessarily be an issue of the Red Sea being blocked, or for that matter, the Strait of Hormuz being blocked. It would be like what's happening now with Saudi Arabia, your oil fields burning in the sun. It's a trap. And again, as people pointed out once before, that Donald Trump was in a quagmire, and that quagmire goes unacknowledged by the White House, at the very least in the media, where Trump claims we have all the missiles in the world, we have all the weapons in the world, we have all the air defense systems in the world, we have everything in the world, we have all the money in the world, we can do whatever we want, we're a magical thing, we're America. Okay, well, nobody really believes that in practice. And I suspect that the Iranians don't believe it because they're pressing, seemingly from their point of view, the particular advantage that they have in dragging the war out into a war of attrition that America doesn't necessarily seem to be in a position to fight. We thought this would be quick. It wasn't. We thought we could take out the leadership and collapse the government. We didn't. We thought we'd be able to get the nukes. We weren't able to do that, according to them, or the nuclear dust, as Trump calls it, which, again, was not the real premise of the war. We had all of these beliefs. And now, at this point, we're not fighting over those things, even though the ultimate objective is to collapse the state of Iran. We're now fighting over the Strait of Hormuz and the ability to get energy from point A to point B. And despite all of Trump's proclamations that the strait is open, the fact that you have 2 oil tankers sinking to the bottom of the Strait of Hormuz right now as we speak implies that Trump is lying or is out to lunch on this issue. We are trapped in a war that we can't win. That's what this boils down to. And the catch becomes, is there going to be a moment of sobriety by the president to acknowledge that point? Up to this point, it doesn't seem like it. Let's see, we have a chat. By the way, if you guys have any questions, comments, if you guys want to support the content, you can do so through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, memberships. All of those things are beneficial to the show. All of those things keeps this boat rocking. It is your support that allows the show to function. And by the way, if you find yourself coming back often and you haven't subscribed, do so. This channel, we're trying to hit 100,000 and we want to be able to give the alerts. I come on all sorts of times of the day, not just in the mornings. In fact, I'm going to have a show this evening with Stanislav Koprovnik. It was supposed to be yesterday. I screwed up in regards to the time because I have a bad eyesight. I read the time wrong, but he was nice enough to join me once again today. So we will have a later show today also with Stanislav, or Stas, as I like to call him. This is from Lori Ald. Keep on keeping on. Lori, I am doing my damnedest. I'm doing my damnedest. What's it? Doing what the hen do the best they can do. Well, one of my guys, the guy who used to play chess with, he was like, doing what the hen do the best they can do. But no, all of your support is appreciated. All of your support keeps the show moving along in the way that it moves along. So, Lori, thank you for that. All right, I am going to end this. I'm going to be on the program coming up, actually with about 20, 30 minutes, give or take. So that is coming up. So definitely check us out there or check me out there. And this is Friday, July 31st. We're going into my birthday month. I am going to be 49. Who cleans up the wreckage? I don't know. That is a good question. I don't know, because you would imagine if the wreckage builds up to a certain amount, it will be difficult for ships to transit the strait in the first place. No, that's a good question. I don't have an answer to that question. I mean, and who is this? Oh, I can't see the name. Charles, Mr. Charles. I think this is Charles. Charles, that is a damn good question. I don't have an answer to it, unfortunately. Yeah, Mr. Charles. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer to it. The only thing I can think of is, I mean, you would think it would have to be Oman or Iran. I mean, one of these countries would have to be able to clear the strait, but I'm not sure. That's a good question. I mean, especially considering the amount of ships that seem to be getting hit in the strait. Now, let's be clear, though. Every ship that gets hit doesn't necessarily blow up the ship. I know there are some images that have come out on social media that have ships blowing up in these kind of glorious and mayhem-esque explosions. And some of that is true, fair enough. But every ship that gets hit by a drone doesn't necessarily blow up the ship in these kind of dramatic ways. So some of these ships can limp their way out of the strait, or some of these ships just go back the other way when they get hit, basically like a warning shot. But the ships that are sinking in the strait, I don't know. That's a good question, Mr. Charles. That is a good question. Let's see. And thanks, Jamal. What time is your show later on? Frank Friel. Frank, the show with, what is his name? Stanislav Stas. That's going to be at 4 p.m. this evening. Also, I need to check with Garland. Garland and I typically do shows on Friday. So there also may be a show on Friday. The show with Stas is only going to go about 30 to 45 minutes. The show with Garland is typically an hour. If I do the show with Garland today, that will probably be at 5 p.m. I need to check with Garland to see if he's down for it. It'd be good to get back with him. But I think that's everything. I think that's all. Also, I got to be honest, I am strongly considering doing an evening war update it would only be like 30 minutes a day, but it may be rewarding, especially for posterity. I guess my thing is there's not always something that jumps out at me that takes place, but I suppose there's always something that takes place in regards to the political space one way or the other. So maybe that works. That doesn't affect the morning show, however. That would just be something extra that would be added to the show. But I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. You can support this content, PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, memberships. All of these things are beneficial to the show. And frankly, all of those things are necessary for the show to function, to keep going. I'm going to be on the program coming up next with myself and Ted Raw. That is, I don't know how to describe that. It's a damn good show, though, or at the very least, I think it is. And Ted and I have a very good rapport with each other. So definitely check us out. That is going to be on the program, however, different network. And I will see you guys later this evening at 4 p.m. And hopefully I can get down with Garland at 5. But we'll see. You all be safe. You all be kind to the degree that you can be kind. Have a good one all. Thanks.